Well, the issue of aged care this week has been in the headlines, as you know, with the release of the Royal Commission's recommendations on Mondays. Nowadays, of course, we tend to shun the term nursing homes, instead using aged care facilities or care homes. But how and when did this word change happen? For more on this, I'm joined now from Sydney on my regular Words Matter segment. Resident wordsmith, of course, the wonderful author and broadcaster Kel Richards here on Credlin. Kel, I love to get the topical word of the moment. Tell us about the shift from aged care homes into care homes.
Well, it started off as being nursing homes after the Second World War. Nursing homes before that, it's an English expression, and it meant basically small private hospitals. After the Second World War, the expression nursing homes was applied to those places where people who were old and poor and unwell were cared for, looked after, fed and so on. And that seemed like a reasonable sort of name to give them in the early 1950s. And it's the name that came to Australia and the name we used here until about 18 months, 2 years ago. The Americans, on the other hand, went another way, starting in 1959 and then sort of exploding in the 1960s. They called them care homes because Americans are probably better at marketing than we are. Suddenly in Australia, where we'd always called them nursing homes, I think about 18 months, 2 years ago, as far as I can find out from my research, suddenly the whole profession, the whole industry stopped talking about nursing homes and started talking about care homes. A lot of it was to do with the Royal Commission, which told us that, in fact, very little nursing was happening in some of those nursing homes. And I think they panicked and they thought, we need a better name. And the politicians for years have been playing the game of change the name, change the perception. So they thought, hello, we'll pick up the American expression, we'll call them care homes. Suddenly we'll be nice people again. That's what they're trying to do.
Well, it's not working. I don't think it's working. I think this has been a story that's dominated talkback right around the country.
Yes,
I mean, it's cut through like nothing else, and I think people are going to demand real change.
Yes.
Let's go to the story out of the US. Dr Seuss. I don't think you find a house in Australia that hasn't got a Dr Seuss book or a kid that hasn't read a Dr Seuss book. But apparently, you know, it's racist, insensitive imagery, and a number of the books will no longer be published. They're off reading lists, and Dr Biden, Joe Biden's wife, was, you know, not pushing out the books as perhaps in the past had been on a reading list this week. Tell me more there.
Yesterday, the 2nd of March, is in America the Read Across America Day. And it's also the birthday of Dr Seuss. It was deliberately chosen. He's such a hero in America. When they decided to have this Read Across America Day to encourage school kids to read books, they chose Dr Seuss Theodore Geisel's birthday quite deliberately. And every year at this time, there's a press release that comes out from the White House saying, you know, make sure your kids get reading. And they always mention Dr Seuss and the fact that it's his birthday. Trump did, Obama did, all the presidents do, except Joe Biden. He put out his proclamation about Read Across America Day and carefully omitted the name of Dr Seuss. Now, what's happened is a bunch of librarians, school teachers have taken they've taken exception to about half a dozen of the 50-odd books that Dr Seuss wrote. Now, it's really hard to know what it is that's offending them. They talk about racial undertones. That's a really interesting expression. What are racial undertones? I think they were looking for racism, couldn't find any, and they decided if you squint and look sideways, you can pick up something that might be interpreted as a racial undertone. I'll give you an example. He wrote 50-odd books. They contain about 2,000 human characters, plus a whole lot of, you know, cats and Grinches and the rest of it, but 2,000 human characters, 2% of whom are black. The others are all white. 2% are black. The American population, 13.4% of the population is black. So they look at that percentage and say, these pictures, these drawings by Dr Seuss are racial and are offensive. One of the books they talked about was his very first book, which is called To Think That I Saw It on Mulberry Street. So I picked up my copy today and had a read of it. And I thought, is there anything racial in this? I found the word Chinaman. Now, we wouldn't use that word today, but the book was written and published in 1937, Peter. In 1937, Chinaman was a perfectly normal word. And the people who publish Dr Seuss, his publishers and the people who own the copyright, they've actually agreed to take 6 of the 50 books out of circulation. And the reason they're doing it is, and this has happened to me too as the author of children's picture books, The people who buy children's picture books are not children. They're adults who buy them for them. And the most important group of adults are the librarians. If you get your library sales for children's picture books, that's when you'll do well. And the librarians are a very woke group these days. Some years ago, I've written 9 or 10 children's picture books. And what I do is I do Australian retellings of well-known fairy tales because I love the Australian language so much. So I turned Little Red Riding Hood into Little Red Riding Hoodie, who was a little goody-goody and went through the bush to look after her grandma, who, because her grandma was sick, she was as crook as a chook. Now, the villain in the story, instead of being a wolf, as it is in Europe, was a dingo, because it's Australian. And at the end of the story, I had a squatter rush in and shoot him. And the publishers were really worried. They said, you can't kill off the dingo at the end. The librarians won't buy the book. So I had to rewrite the end of the book so that the dingo fainted from fright. That's what happens. You've got a small number of people who are oversensitive, and suddenly the publishers very sensibly, for commercial reasons, have to fit in what they want with what they want.
Golly.
And that's what's happening.
All right, these librarians think they're principals and policy makers and maybe prime ministers as well. Who knew that they were that powerful? I will go back to my primary school days and change my mind. There you go. Kel Richards, as always, you're brilliant. Thank you for your time.
Talk to you next time.